Welcome to the 2022 Antigua Forum, hosted by the Universidad Francisco Marroquín here in Guatemala. Today we are with Tony Woodlief. He's the Executive Vice President of the State Policy Network, the former president of the Bill of Rights Institute, and the former president of the Mercatus Center. He's also the author of a new book called I, Citizen. It's a book about reclaiming American self-governance. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Tony, I had the pleasure of working for the James Madison Institute, a free market, state-based think tank in Florida, and it's an affiliated member of the State Policy Network, where you're the executive vice president. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about the role the State Policy Network plays in the United States?
We help incubate, support, provide training, grant funding to state-based institutions across the country, so 63 affiliate members in states, think tanks and other kinds of organizations. And what we're trying to do is help develop a network of organizations that are pushing for freedom in their states and also pushing back against the US federal government because it more and more encroaches on state and community autonomy.
So one thing I've noticed is, we as Americans often complain a lot about what does or does not get done in Washington, D.C. It seems in the state capitals, things at least can get done, things can be advanced. It's a little bit more local, a little bit closer to the people. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between what's going on in the state capitals versus the nation's capital?
Well, that's a great question. So we see in the US something called polarization. We have two primary parties, the Democrat Party, Republican Party, and over time the politicians in those parties have become more separated from each other in terms of their views. They used to have more intermingling. You could find Democrats who believe in gun rights, you could find Republicans who believed in abortion rights, and now they're highly polarized. We see the same kind of polarization in state legislatures, but they have much more comity. They're able to still work together, and a key reason for that is, number one, they're closer to the people, so they have to get stuff done. They mostly have requirements to produce balanced budgets, so they can't just kick things down the road and have deficits. And they have a variety of rules for how they operate that really allow the minority party to have their say, whereas in Congress, more and more, the power is in the hands of a few party leaders. So whoever controls the House and the Senate, they can decide whatever they want, and they mostly don't have to listen to the other side.
There's so much political division in the United States today. Most people are not only on just Team Red or Team Blue, but they sometimes don't even want to associate with people who hold different viewpoints than themselves. How have Americans become so divided today?
I'm a political scientist by training, and I wanted to dig into that very question. Just how divided are we? Because when you read major papers, you listen to the news, that's the narrative we hear. We hear that the country's split down the middle, red and blue, and they hate each other. And what I show with polling data is that mostly Americans are not that invested in political parties. In fact, 42% of Americans say they're independent. They're not even part of a party, and they're not that ideological. But there's around 20% of Americans who are very invested in their political identity, and they take their cues from our political class. So operatives, consultants, campaign officials, pollsters, donors, bundlers. Those people are very polarized. They hate each other, and around 1/5 of Americans listen to them and feel the same way. But the good news is most Americans, for now, don't feel that way.
One thing I've seen happening, whether it's in the federal capital in D.C. or the state capital like Tallahassee, is that even when good, principled people get elected to office, they're quickly surrounded by a lot of entrenched interests. Some of the things that you mentioned in your book and that you've mentioned in this conversation. How can somebody like that navigate their way forward in this nearly impossible environment?
That is the big challenge. So we changed, starting in the 60s and 70s, we changed how we do primaries, how each party chooses their candidates, and we did so in a way that disempowered the working class. It disempowered local officials who, even though they might be a little corrupt, they understood the people in their communities, and we gave a lot of power to political elites and intellectuals. So that led us down the path of those groups choosing more extreme candidates, which are less appealing to regular Americans. Then on top of that, we changed campaign finance law so that we really give a lot of power now to independent groups to spend a lot of money in elections, and we know that they tend to be more ideologically extreme. We also know that local parties more and more don't recruit moderates or centrists. They recruit people who are, if not politically extreme, then temperamentally extreme. The people who have flame wars on Twitter, because they get more media attention. So the odds that a regular person with views that represent most Americans can even get elected and get the money necessary to get elected and get media attention are so low. And then when this person gets to Washington, they find out immediately that the party bosses that control Congress want them to shut up, right? Do what they're told, vote the way they're told, don't speak up in committee, and help raise money. So you have to go against all those institutional forces if you want to simply represent what most Americans want.
So what are some of the policy or political solutions that you might offer, and maybe they've been offered in your book, for how we can get past these divisions?
So the latter part of the book, I had this dilemma because of course I have all these ideas. If you make me king, I can fix everything, right? But I wanted to be realistic. I wanted to offer any reader who buys my book, which is very important, buy the book, I wanted to give every reader things that they can do realistically. And so I started with the thing we have the most control over, which is our own mentality. And the very first thing I suggest is love your neighbor. And I talk a little bit about what that means, because love is action, not feeling, right? Feelings are cheap, right, and superficial, but love is action. So I start with loving your neighbor and what that looks like, and then how that can extend into your neighborhood and your community and your town. And what I'm suggesting is we need to reknit the bonds that have been frayed, and that allows us to have in our communities more solidarity, and then we can begin to push back through our state-based groups against Washington, D.C. And the reason I suggest that is because the two parties have become so polarized, they don't get anything done anymore. And most power now in Washington is exercised by bureaucracies. So for every law that Congress passes, federal agencies pass 28 rules that have the same effect as law. These are not elected to people. So we have to push back against that power that these agencies are extending into our communities. And it begins by building more bonds to our neighbors.
From the perspective of those of us who believe in liberty and limited government and free markets, how can we maybe persuade others towards this, movement towards liberty without being in an argument that gets us into political divisions?
I talk a bit about how we can get past that Republican-Democrat divide. And so my appeal to my more progressive friends is that while we may not agree on what we want our tax rates to be, or how much money the government should spend, we can agree that those decisions should be made in our communities by people that we elect to represent us, where we can debate, right, and have arguments and come to compromise, rather than being made by people we didn't even elect. And so that's my appeal to my friends on the right and the left.
So when you look at where problems are being solved in our country, in our communities, how can we as Americans become more problem solvers and less divided on politics?
Well, I think it begins with having engagement in our community, because there are a lot of problems that are at the local level that we can solve. We can help the neighbor who is struggling and maybe doesn't look after his children like he should, or another neighbor who has a bunch of trees down in her yard, and we can help people in our community and get to know each other and solve our problems that way. We're at Antigua Forum. I love this model, this approach, and this could be replicated elsewhere. One of the wonderful things about this forum is they don't try to hold on to their IP. They're very generous. They've been generous with State Policy Network, my organization, helping us do something like Antigua Forum with state-based groups. And you see, when you bring people together focused on finding a solution rather than proving a point, the barriers that might exist between them fall. And there's a lot of opportunity to do that in every community.
Great. Well, Tony, I want to thank you for being with us at the Antigua Forum, and we hope to see you back here in the future.
I hope so too. Thanks for having me.